Ahoy there! Welcome to a rather different episode of Porygondolier. Today I'm going to be doing a deep dive into my Pokemon Red Map Randomizer. I'll be going through how and why it works, and the techniques used to ensure that it is both playable and completable. If you'd rather skip the geeky behind the scenes stuff, there should be a link on your screen now to my playthrough of the game. You're probably aware that map randomizers already exist for newer games, but after much googling I came to the conclusion that the Gen 1 version probably didn't exist, and we can't have that, so I decided to make one. And I had no idea how complex this project was going to become. First, let's look at what we actually need to randomize here. Most of the doors, ladders, staircases and teleporters are known as warps in the game. There are a bunch of files, one for each map, that contain info like NPCs, items, and indeed, warp coordinates and destinations. Warps are pretty straightforward. The tile with a Pokemon Center door on it is defined as a warp to the map with the Pokemon Center in it. Warps to one side for a moment, there are also lifts. There are 3 elevators in the game, in the Celadon Mart, the Sylph Co, and the Rocket Hideout. The lifts in the Celadon Mart and Sylph Co are there purely for convenience, as you can get to any of the floors via the stairs. Because of this, I decided that these lifts would be, let's say, out of order. This simplifies things a bit, and personally, I don't think the inclusion of randomized lifts would have added much to the experience. Now, the lift in the Rocket Hideout is actually necessary for reaching Giovanni on floor B4. For that reason, I decided to modify the base game so that the entrance to the lift on B2 connects directly to the lift entrance on B4, cutting out the actual elevator room completely. This might seem a bit pointless, since all of the warps are going to get jumbled up anyway, but this is actually really important, as it ensures that some warp, somewhere in the messed up Kanto region, will in fact lead to the room with Giovanni. Connections are a system used by the game when you move from one outdoor map to another. I had no desire to randomize this, but there was a little problem. Because the game is programmed to use connections for outdoor map traversing, warping between 2 outdoor maps was not factored in by the developers. In this example, I walk into a house in Saffron and arrive in Vermilion City. I'm supposed to be outside the Pokemon Center, but instead, I appear to be treading water. The reason this happens is that the game is not checking what the new coordinates should be for the player. What it's actually done is remembered my coordinates from Saffron and placed me in that position, but on the Vermilion City map. Thankfully, this wasn't too hard to fix, and with that done, all that was left was the randomizing. Or so I thought. This turns out to be quite a grand endeavor. You know how when you leave a Pokemon Center there's a kind of carpet thing, and you can walk through either side to get out? Yeah? Well, that is 2 separate warp points, which converge on the same warp point at the outside entrance. When we walk back in, it always puts you on the left. Here's the entrance to the Viridian Forest, and there are 4 separate warp points we can use here to leave. I didn't want each of these exit points to lead to a different place, so I opened up a new Excel spreadsheet and set about grouping each of these points. A couple of days later, I'd compiled a full list of nodes with the grand total coming to 576. Nodes with multiple warp tiles have a destination tile set that you will always arrive at. With this, I could randomize the points, and no matter which of the 4 exit tiles I used in the Viridian Forest, I would always end up in the same place. I could now finally start on the randomizer. As a first attempt, I made a list of numbers in Excel from 1 to 576 and placed the same set of numbers next to them in a random order. I then fed that information to Charizard, which rewrote the warp destinations according to the list. This worked, except for one problem. I could walk into a Pokemon Center, arrive in a gym, and when I try to exit the gym, instead of going back to where I came from, I'm whisked away to somewhere else completely. This might be fun in its own way, but this wasn't in line with my vision for the project. I realized that I was going to have to find a way to pair up the warp points. In other words, if point 1 leads to point 2, then point 2 should lead back to point 1. Easy enough, I can take my randomized list of numbers, cut it in half, and arrange it like this. Now we have some pairings. This works much better than before, but this is only the beginning. Imagine, if you will, that the Viridian City Pokemon Center connected directly to the Pewter City Pokemon Center. Each of these maps is what I've dubbed a dead end. I call them that because they literally are dead ends. If you walk into a Pokemon Center, there is nowhere to go but back out again. If we connect two dead ends together, not only could you never escape from it, you could never get in from the outside either. We've created a closed loop. If an important location is trapped inside one of these closed loops, the game is essentially impossible to beat. And that is bad. So I needed to come up with a way to pair together all the points without creating any closed loops. In other words, every single point must be connected to every other point on the map via some route. And to make it extra playable, I wanted to make sure that no HMs were required to get to any area. This is to avoid a situation where you could pass from one place to another if only you had the HM that is at the place you want to go to. I really don't want players to put hours into a playthrough only to discover that it was impossible from the get-go. So here is what I came up with. I call it Smart Linker. Please forgive the rubbish naming sense. Smart Linker is a fancy Excel macro that grows a network of warps from a starting point, rather than just pairing them up and hoping for the best. Firstly, each of those 576 points that I mentioned gets an overworld group. If it's possible to walk from point 1 to point 2, they're in the same overworld group. If we need to surf, or use any other HM to get from point 3 to 4, those are in different overworld groups. Naturally, warps in all non-connected areas, such as the 9 separate rooms of Sabrina's gym, all fall into separate overworld groups. By the time I was done, I had 294 overworld groups assigned to 576 nodes. The biggest group is Celadon City and its adjacent routes, with 13 warp points. All the groups that contain exactly one warp point are dead ends. The groups with 2 nodes are paths, and groups with 3 or more are hubs. The Smart Linker macro takes a random list of numbers, 1 to 576 as its input, and starts with the first point in the list. It gets the overworld group for this warp point and activates it. What this means is that all of the other points in the same overworld group are now available to use in future pairings. It now looks down the list for the first point that can legally be connected. I call this the candidate point. The rules that govern this are: 1. For obvious reasons, both points cannot be dead ends. 2. They cannot both be one-way junctions. 3. It can't be a dead end connected to a one-way junction either. There is also one more rule that I'll come back to in a little bit. Once the macro has found a successful candidate point, it goes ahead and makes the link, and also activates the group of the candidate point. Now the macro needs to find a new starting point, and to ensure that this is connected to the existing structure, it has to select a point from a group that has already been activated. In other words, it must be possible to walk from one of the previously linked points to the new starting point. It then follows the same process to find a valid candidate point, and this continues until all 576 points are connected in one big interlinked network. The final rule I mentioned for linking points has one important objective: prevent a scenario where all open nodes of the network get connected to a dead end, meaning that there are no longer any points left to connect to. A really simple example of this would be a dead end connected to a gate with 2 warp points connected to another dead end. None of the previously mentioned rules explicitly prevent this from happening. To overcome this, the final rule keeps track of the number of available points. That is, non-linked points in active groups. For example, if we start with the Celadon group and 12 of its points get connected to dead ends, there is only one available point left. In this case, we must not connect to a dead end, as this will result in the network being completed prematurely. The macro keeps track of the number of available points to prevent this from happening. Okay, so with all that, it works, right? Remember these numbers? Well, it turns out that these inputs are mathematically impossible for the macro to resolve. No matter how many times I tried with a new set of numbers, I was always left with exactly 12 dead-end points that could not be joined. To see why this happens, let's consider an example starting with the Fuchsia City hub. The Overworld group is activated, and there are now 10 open nodes to connect to. If we connect one of these to a dead end, it reduces the number of open nodes to 9. If we connect it to a path, the network is extended, but the total number of open nodes is still 10. Finally, if we connect it to a hub, the number of open nodes increases. What I'm getting at is that we can run out of open points if we have too many dead ends and not enough hubs. To make SmartLinker work, somehow I either had to delete some dead ends, perhaps some house interiors that aren't required, or merge some of the groups without creating a situation where the player can get stuck. And then I had a brainwave. When we start a new game of Pokemon Red, there is a single potion waiting in the PC storage for us. What if we change this to the Sylph Co card key? If the player is able to open up any of the doors in the Sylph Co, each of those separate overworld groups can be merged. After doing this, I was left with 285 groups, and the macro is now able to solve. It doesn't always find a solution, but I set it up so that it automatically starts again with a new set of numbers when it fails, and it usually gets a valid network within a few tries. With the bulk of the work completed, I just needed to consider a few special cases. What if we come up the game corner stairs before flicking the switch? Well, we are able to enter no problem. We can then either leave through the game corner exit or fight the rocket. Worst case, we can black out. But what if we arrive in a doorway that is blocked by an NPC? Now this could be a problem, so I went ahead and moved all those NPCs one tile over. If we arrive at a locked gym entrance, this is what happens. We can't get back in, but there are plenty of other doors nearby. What about all the key items needed to access certain areas? I found myself worrying that the Pokeflute might be needed to get the Pokeflute. I had similar concerns about the SS ticket, Sylph Scope, secret key, and the liquid refreshment required for the guards. As a workaround, I started adding all the items a player might need to the player's PC. But before long, I realised I'd sucked out a lot of the challenge of the game. I didn't want to just hand these items out on a plate. There had to be a better way. And there was! Introducing SmartLinker Part 2, Path Checker. Path Checker is an algorithm that runs after a successful SmartLink that creates a web within the network of routes containing only the locations accessible without using a one-way junction. Now it checks for a number of key points, such as the inside of Bill's house where we get the SS ticket, or B4 of the rocket hideout where we get the Sylph Scope. It ensures that all of these items are available without going on one-way paths. If they aren't, SmartLinker starts again. With this, it can take quite a while to get a solution, but I'm much happier with it. The player still gets the card key as mentioned before, and I decided to give 5 Great Balls for fun, and also the bicycle. But that's all. I also had to make a bunch of other small tweaks that I won't get into, but it ended up increasing the number of overworld groups a bit, so to fix this, I moved a few blocks around on Route 2 and one in Pewter City to allow some more groups to join together. I also made a permanent connection between the Champions Room and Hall of Fame. This was mainly due to the fact that if we enter the Champions Room from above, the game still forces us to walk up as if we are approaching John. This puts us out of bounds and crashes the game. Additionally, you're likely to be trying to find and beat gyms and Elite Four members in your quest, and it's nice if the Hall of Fame stuff still comes immediately after beating the champion. Finally, to allow the player to get started without too much messing around, Red's house and Oak's lab are also not randomized. Oak's lab is a non-negotiable here, as changing its entrance is game-breaking. Red's house is more for convenience. Now, because these links are set by default, I've actually just created a problem. Before SmartLinker even gets started, we already have 2 separate mini-networks that will need to be linked up somehow. To prevent any issues, I set the starting point of Path Checker to Pallet Town and added the Champions Room as one of the endpoints to check for. This ensures that there is definitely a route between the start and end of the game. And that just about wraps it up. There's probably a bunch of other things I can do to improve the randomizer, but I'm happy with it for now. You can find links to several map randomized patches for Pokemon Red and Blue in the description. Each one contains a different, smart-linked network of warps. If anyone plays them all and still wants more, let me know in the comments and I'll add some more. Lastly, I want to say thanks for watching this video and for generally being a really brilliant person. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I look forward to welcoming you back to another video soon. For now, bye!